Hello, welcome to the Horns and Whistles Workshop YouTube channel. My name's Mark. Thanks for joining me on this video, during which we're going to be installing a DC sound decoder and most importantly, upgrading the speaker on your DCC sound decoder. I'm going to be doing this on this Hornby Railroad Class 47 model, which I took delivery of last week, using the Hornby Class 47 Twin Track Sound or TTS sound decoder. The speaker I'm going to be fitting is this, which is the Soundscape Volcano, which is available from Horns and Whistles Workshop. As you can see, this speaker is very large. It's 10 centimeters long, which means that it won't fit in a fair few different locomotives, but I'm going to show you how to install it to this and other similar locos, as well as give you some examples of other models that I've fitted it to. Now, why am I using a Hornby TTS decoder? Because many of you will identify that that decoder is quite a budget decoder. It's exactly for that reason that I'm using that decoder, because I personally think DCC Sound is a really enjoyable enhancement to model railway modelling, excuse me. However, that being said, if you buy a high-end DCC Sound decoder, you're going to be looking at upwards of £120 just for the sound decoder alone, not including the money you've spent on the actual model itself. Now, personally, I find that to be quite eye-watering sums of money just to get sound from your locomotive. And it might actually be quite prohibitive to a lot of DCC modelers getting into DCC sound, because you can buy a basic DCC decoder without sound for around about £20–25. You then got to spend an extra £100 to make your model make model railway sounds, unless of course you go for a lower end, more budget friendly Hornby TTS decoder, which comes in at about £40–45. Now, there are limitations to it. The sound quality isn't as good. You don't get as many different types of sound. You don't get as many available configuration variables to program your decoder. However, if what you want is a basic sound experience on your model railway, personally, I go for the Hornby TTS decoders, because I think they make DC sound accessible to far more modelers than the high-end decoders do. Now, the Hornby TTS decoder, along with pretty much every other sound decoder you can buy, comes with a little round flat speaker that's about 1 inch in diameter. Now, I've actually already removed the speaker from this model, so it's not visible in it. But those speakers, you'll probably be familiar with the sort of speaker I'm referring to. They give quite a thin, tinny, poor quality sound experience, and a really easy and inexpensive way that you can really enhance the experience you get from your DCC sound is to upgrade the speaker. And generally speaking, the bigger the better when it comes to speakers. That's not an exact science, but as a general rule, the bigger the better, which is why I'm going for this really large, it's 10 centimeters or 4 inches long, Horns and Whistles Workshop Soundscape Volcano speaker. Now, the size of it obviously makes it impossible to fit in a lot of models. It won't fit in the vast majority of steam locomotives because there's not enough room. And if you have a diesel locomotive that has got a heavy die-cast chassis, like a lot of the Bachmann stuff, again, it won't fit because there's not enough room. However, if I put this to the side and bring in this model, these Hornby Railroad models, being quite inexpensive, are fairly basic in their construction, which presents us with an opportunity to do some work to really enhance it, because underneath the body is a lot of space in which we can fit this large speaker with a few simple modifications to the chassis. And that's what I intend to demonstrate on this video. So let's get to it. The first thing we've got to do is remove the body. Now, on this particular model, the buffers all need to be pulled out, because the buffers go through the body into the chassis and help secure the body. So just thumb and forefinger with a little bit of a twist and pull, they will just pop out, and I'm going to pop them in a little tray or a little tub that I've got off camera. It's always useful to have a little tray or tub, just so you know that your parts that you're removing are not going to get lost. And then, just to remove the body, just run your fingernail down there to unclip a few, I think there's 2 or 3 on each side, clips that secure the body to the chassis. Once you've got all those unclipped, it comes apart. Now, turning the body inside, you can see there 1, 2, 3 little clips on each side that secure the body to the chassis, locating in 1, 2, 3 little holes. So I'm going to put the body to one side. We don't need that as part of the installation until right at the very end. Now, if you look at the model as it is, I'm going to just turn it round because being right-handed, I find it easier to work that way. This is not going to fit without making a few modifications because it just doesn't work. The body won't go on top of that speaker. So we need to make a few really simple modifications to this model. Now, one of the things that I find on this model, and you will find on a lot of Hornby railroad models, is it's very light. Now, lightness is not a good thing when it comes to locomotives because that gives you poorer traction and poorer stability. So what I'm going to do is, as we strip this back, as we make some really basic modifications to it, I'm just going to add some weight as well. That will give us better stability, better traction, and it will actually improve the sound quality because it will reduce or eliminate some vibrations that you might otherwise get. Now, there's a few tools needed for this job. You're going to need a couple of screwdrivers. I've got a crosshead and a flathead there. You're going to need some wire cutters, a wire stripper. You might need a craft knife, and you will also need some solder and a soldering iron, which I've got up above the camera on a shelf heating up. So what we're going to do is remove some of the gubbins in here. This is the speaker housing for the sort of basic 1-inch diameter speaker that is normally supplied with a Hornby TTS decoder. I'm going to remove that, and then we're going to use the void under here to add some weight. And it's just removed with 2 screws, really simply. And then it lifts out. It's going to move that out the way, keep that to one side. Now you'll see the wires here are folded over and stuck together with some black tack. That's really useful for us because that means there's plenty of flex there for me to straighten this out, because what I'm going to do is move this decoder socket over to here. Quite why they're not manufactured that way, I don't know, because that then gives you a lot more available space here, whereas putting the decoder socket here restricts the amount of space you've got available to make modifications. But anyway, that is what it is. So in order to do that, I need to pull out the blanking plug, which comes pre-fitted. Just use thumb and forefinger to wobble it up and unplug that. And then there's 2 screws, one here and one here, which I'm going to undo, and that will, I need a smaller screwdriver, and that will effectively loosen the 8-pin decoder socket. Now these screws are tiny, so make sure you don't lose them, although in fairness you're not actually going to need them again, come to think of it. Now all I'm going to do is lift this decoder socket. Now be careful because the wires are soldered to the bottom of it. So you need to make sure you don't stretch those wires because you're going to break some solder joints if you do. So I'm just going to tease out these wires here just by pulling them, and I'm going to get rid of some of that black tack on there. I'll keep that because I will probably put that to use. There we go. Black tack is quite a handy thing to have, so I will keep that. And what I'm going to do is use some black tack to stick this decoder plug down here, and I'm going to put on the underside a bit of black tack on each end, a bit here and a bit there, a big dollop, and then stick that down there. Now I don't want to stick it flat against the chassis because there needs to be enough space underneath it for the pins of the 8-pin plug. Where are the pins? There are the pins. There needs to be enough room for those pins to push through and go down into. So that's why I'm not going to put it flat against the chassis, but I'm just going to use 2 dobs of that same black tack that I've just pulled off of those wires. Put a bit there, a bit there, and then I'm just gonna lightly press. I don't need to press too hard. Put that in place. There we go. That's that secured. Now we've got a few wires here which we'll do something with to tidy up, but that gives us now a nice big bit of space here, a bit of void here to put in our speaker, which will go neatly there. Now I'm going to have to make one further modification, which I'll do off camera. You can see just here, there's two little stalks, one there and one there. That is what the decoder was attached to. Now I'm going to need to remove them. I would suggest you use some sort of craft knife or blade. I wouldn't cut them off with pliers like so, because you risk cracking or shattering the chassis. If you've got like a Dremel, which is what I'm going to do in a minute, with a little cutting disc, you'll be able to really carefully cut those off, or shave them down with a file or something like that, or even if you've got a really good quality heavy duty craft knife, you'll be able to cut them off. Now, a couple of obvious words of warning. First of all, don't cut the wires. It's not the end of the world, but it just creates more work for you. So tuck those out of the way, and if you want to use a little bit of black tack or sellotape to tuck them down the side of the model so they're out of your way, that's not a bad idea. And also just be aware that by making this sort of heavy modification to your model, there is a chance that you're going to void any warranty that Hornby offer. So make sure that your model works and you're happy with it before you do any of this. So I'm going to go and cut them off, sand them down or file them down a little bit, and then I will be back with you. Okay, so I'm back, having shaved off those. So it was those two stalks there, and while I was at it, I did these two here as well. I just need to scrape a bit away from that, just to give me a much more even and flat surface. So that's all done, and that took me 2 or 3 minutes just with a cutting disc on a Dremel sort of multi-cutter tool. So I mentioned earlier, this is very light. We've now got loads and loads of space in here. So what I'm going to do is get a strip of weights here, which I'll put a link to in the video description below, and I'm going to put weight in here. Now, when you're adding weight to a model, which for locomotives is generally a good idea, there are 2 rules. It must be central, i.e. not off to one side. It should also be central longitudinally, i.e. not all at one end and leaving the other without any traction. And you must put it as low as you possibly can. The lower the center of gravity, the more stable your model is going to be. So this is ideal. It's bang in the middle of the loco longitudinally, it's nice and low down, and as long as I fit them centrally across the width of the model, that will be all good. Now these are self-adhesive, so there's a strip here. You just peel the backing off and then you can stick them down. Now what I'm going to do is make a small tower with them. So with just a pair of scissors, they come in a strip and it goes long, short, or sorry, short, long, short, long, short, long. So I'm going to cut them off in pairs, one long one and one short one in each pair. I do then have an odd short one left over. And then what I'm going to do is just stack them on top of each other. And I'm just going to lay them out a bit like bricklaying, i.e. long and short, alternating lengthways or overlapping like that. Make a little tower. And then just peel off the backing. Now that won't go widthways, will it? No, that'll have to go lengthways. Just going to put that in the middle, nice and centrally. And then that will be stuck down. That's obviously secured with this self-adhesive backing. And that's added a bit of weight to the model, which will add to the stability. I'll just put this spare one to one side. So now all we need to do is secure these or tidy these wires, which I'll use a bit of black tack for, and then attach our new speaker to our decoder, plug it in and give it a go. So grab a bit of black tack. So I haven't got enough left over from removing it from all those cables. Just with a couple of tiny little bits of black tack, just going to secure the wires at the motor end. So just wrap or roll a sausage of black tack between your thumb and forefinger, wrap it around the wires, and then just push it down. Make sure that the bogey turns without the wires catching or snagging, which it does, that's fine. And then same at the other end, make a little sausage between your thumb and forefinger, and then wrap that round all 4 of the wires that are there, and then straighten it out a bit. And where shall I put that? I'll put that there, stick it down. So there we go, that's all our wiring nice and tidy, and the speaker is going to go across the top of those wires. But the first thing we're going to do is attach the speaker to the decoder. Now, I said I'd already removed the original speaker from this decoder. The golden rule when you're removing speakers from a decoder is never, ever, ever detach the speaker wires from the decoder. You never want to get a soldering iron near your decoder. You're going to avoid the warranty, and chances are you're going to ruin it. You always detach the wires from the speaker, and you can either desolder them quite easily, or you can just snip them off. But when you snip them off, make sure you snip them off at the speaker end, so you've still got an inch or 2 of wire to play with in order to attach to your new speaker, which is here. Now this comes with probably the best part of 4 inches of wire. We don't need all of that, so I'm going to trim half of that off just by cutting it like that. And then I'm just going to untwist the wires a little bit. So I've got my black and red separated, and then using the wire stripper, I'm just going to strip about 5 or 6 mil of wire on each of the cables. Now in your bag with your speaker, you will have had a length of heat shrink tubing. You need to cut that in half because you need to insulate both wires where you join the speaker to the decoder. Now that is absolutely imperative that you insulate these joins, because if you short speaker wires on a DCC decoder, you're going to blow the amplifier, and your decoder will probably still work to control your model, but the sound will be no more. So properly insulating these joins is really, really important. So slide the unshrunk heat shrink tubing over the wires on the speaker. If I can get all the strands of cable in, that would be useful, wouldn't it? And then bringing your decoder and twisting together red to red. In fact, what I am going to do is just strip back a little bit more cable on the decoder because it's a little bit short and I haven't got enough to twist in. So I'm just going to, again, 6 mil or so. Black to black, red to red. In truth, it doesn't actually matter. It will work either way around, but for the sake of keeping it neat and tidy, twist together those 2 strands of wire. And again, I'll reiterate, make sure you've already slid over your heat shrink tubing, because if you solder these wires together and then realize you forgot to slide the heat shrink tubing over one of the bits of wire, you're going to have to separate your solder joint and start again. So they are twisted together. And now we're just going to bring in a small amount of solder to secure those together properly. Try and make it as neat as possible, because if you get a big dollop of solder, as I did on that black wire initially, you might struggle to slide your heat shrink tubing over. And then with your wires joined, fold the solder join back towards the decoder like that, and then slide your heat shrink tubing over the solder join so it's completely covering the solder joint, and try and get the solder joint so it's in the middle of that bit of heat shrink tubing. So again, fold the joint back towards the decoder, slide the heat shrink tubing over, and now you need to shrink that tubing. Heat shrink tubing is heat shrink by nature. Just apply a bit of heat to it. So I'm going to use the sort of, not the end of my soldering iron, but the sort of shaft of my soldering iron. Just gently, lightly rub over that heat shrink tubing. You don't want to put too much heat, because if you melt it, then it will you'll get holes in it and it won't insulate properly. So just gently and quickly rub over until it's shrunk over the join so that it won't move, and that's absolutely fine. So there you go, your decoder and your speaker are now joined together. We need to fit them into the model, put the body back on and give it a whirl. Fitting into the model is nice and easy. Plug your decoder into your socket. Now, if I bring this in, you'll see on this corner here is a number 1, and which ironically, when you've got the screw heads in there, is covered up by the washer on the screw, so often you can't actually see that. And on the decoder socket on the back of the plug, you might not be able to see it, but where the orange wire is, there's also a number 1. That shows you which way round you need to plug that in. So the number 1 goes in the number 1. So just plug that in there, being careful not to bend any of the pins. That goes in there nicely. And then we're going to stick this speaker down with some black tack, and then tuck our decoder in such a way that it's not going to foul on anything, short circuit on anything that's metallic or anything like that. So a bit more black tack needed. Again, if you need some black tack, a link to get some will be in the video description. I'm going to put a bit at each end on the underside of the speaker. So a bit there and a bit there, and then that's going to go down there. And then I'm not going to push down because I don't want to put too much pressure through the bogey. So what I am going to do is pick the model up and then, getting the bogies out the way, with my thumb and fingers, squeeze that speaker into place, pushing all that black tack down, make sure it's central, and there you go, that is plugged in. And then all we need to do is tuck the decoder somewhere behind all these wires so that it won't move. It's not shorting on anything metal. What you do want to make sure is, if you can tuck the cables away under there, that'll be ideal. And then you just need to make sure that the decoder isn't going to touch the metal of the pins on the plug, which in this case it's not. It can't get there because the wires would prevent it from doing so. And there you go, that is your speaker installed. So all we need to do is pop the body back on, which is dead easy. That fits nicely. That speaker has been given plenty of room, so there's no issues with putting the body back on. And then put the buffers back in, and then we'll put it on a test track and we'll see how it sounds. So I'll see you on the track. Now, there is one thing I forgot to mention when we were on the workbench, and that is the volume setting on these decoders. Now, on these Hornby TTS decoders, the volume is controlled by CV number 182. And for these speakers, you need to make sure that you have the volume turned right down. Now, CV 182 has a range of up to a maximum of 8 being the maximum volume, 1 being the minimum volume. I've got this one set to the minimum volume. As you will see, it's plenty loud enough. I would suggest that you only consider using volume setting 1 or 2 as a value to set against CV 182, because if you turn it up any higher, you may find that the speaker, because it's quite a powerful speaker, it will draw too much power from the amplifier on the decoder, which has a built-in fail-safe, and if it detects that it might get overloaded, it cuts the sound. So you may find that if you turn the volume up any louder than 2, firstly, I think you'll find it too loud to be enjoyable. And secondly, you may find that when you've got the motor sounds running, when you try and do a blast of the horn or a blast of the whistle, the sound cuts out as a fail-safe. Please make sure that you consult your instruction manual for your relevant decoder to find out how to change the volume, because all decoders are different, and the example I've just given you is purely for this particular decoder. So let's turn it on, give it a whirl, and you can see what it sounds like. So there we go. As you can see, that gives a really nice enhancement to the quality of the sound that you get from that basic Hornby twin track sound decoder. Now, one of the things I mentioned early on in the video is the size of the speaker. Obviously, we've had to modify this Hornby Railroad model, and this already has quite a lot of void space in the body. Yet we still had to remove this speaker housing. We had to shave down two of the little stalks that secure the speaker housing and the decoder socket in order to make enough room to fit that speaker in this model. However, having said that, it was quite simple and it didn't take very long at all. Another model that I've done that to is this here. Now, this is a Hornby Class 66 model, and again, if I remove the body, and excuse me while this, oh, it didn't take ages, by making a few simple adjustments, namely moving the decoder socket from the middle where it was over to here, I've been able to fit that speaker in the middle of the model, causing no issues whatsoever in terms of replacement of the body or any other issues whatsoever to do with the running of the model. So as you can see, I can't guarantee that these speakers will fit on every Hornby Railroad diesel model, but I'm yet to find one that they don't. Good, because the Railroad models having a lot of space in them and the chassis being predominantly made of plastic means that there's plenty of opportunity to make room and to modify the chassis where necessary in order to fit those large, really good quality speakers that give you a really decent enhancement to your DCC sound experience, even with the most basic of decoders, namely the Hornby TTS decoders, which incidentally I've also got fitted in the Class 66. So there you go, that is this video completed. It was quite a simple task. The benefits are very good and far outweigh the simplicity of the task at hand, and all that is required really is a basic ability to solder and some basic tools to modify the chassis. So I hope that's been really useful for you, and I hope that enables you to really enhance your experience when you delve into the availability and the fun that is to be had on DCC Sound. So I'll see you next time. Take care.